BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good week, and now because it's Friday, we're going to be talking all about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And this week on Cooper Friday, I have the pleasure of being joined by Brandon Arnold. He is someone who is no stranger to the D.B. Cooper sleuth community, which we call the Vortex. Brandon, are you with me?
Oh, I sure am.
Yes, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Box Online Radio. And you've been a guest on the Cooper Vortex in the past, correct?
Yes, of course. It was a real pleasure to be on there with Darren.
So, firstly, what made you curious about the D.B. Cooper mystery when you first learned about this way back when?
Well, I can't tell you when I first heard of it. It was one of those tales that you hear from time to time, and every time it would come up, I would get more and more interested in it. I wish I could say I watched the Unsolved Mysteries or whatever, but it was just something would come up, DB Cooper. Oh, I'm like, oh, I remember this. I want to dig in. And then I found a podcast called Infamous America, where they did, like your standard 1 hour overview of it. But there was a guest on it that recommended Darren's the Cooper Vortex podcast. He was like, "This is like deep dive stuff," and I was like, "Oh, well, that's what I want." And so I found Darren's Cooper Vortex podcast, and I just got sucked into the vortex ever since then.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I would like to ask you, though, can you provide an introduction to who D.B. Cooper was or the story? I always give mine every Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, but I would like you to do it in your own words. Is that okay?
You want me to give you a story of the hijacking?
Yes. Just in case somebody has clicked on this and they have, just accidentally clicked on this side video, they haven't heard of D.B. Cooper before. What would you say about the D.B. Cooper
Oh,
skyjacking?
sure, sure. So it was a story of a young black man about the age of 21 who got on a plane in Omaha and demanded $2,000 to fly to Seattle and then jumped out in the middle of nowhere. Could you believe it? I'm sorry, I'm
You
just kidding.
should have asked for more money than that. $2,000.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
working
just
on the
kidding.
cheap.
Okay, let me. Portland, Seattle, middle-aged man, Dan Cooper, passed the note, said I have a bomb. He wants parachutes. He wants 4 parachutes. He wants money. He wants a knapsack that he didn't get. I don't know why he didn't bring his own knapsack. Uh, put the flaps down when he leaves. Jumped. Landed in the wilderness. Camped out for days. Went to the. Well, probably if it was Rekka, he went to the. What's the Rekka Cafe? What was the name of that?
I don't remember the exact name of the cafe, but you mean that Walter Recca was walking in the woods in the rain with a raincoat draped over his arm, and he meets up with a guy, and he goes to a
Yeah,
coffee
the
shop.
cowboy, and he calls the payphone. So it was probably Rekka, um, because I know the flight path doesn't make sense, but back then, like Rekka was in CIA, KGB. He could have had a steerable parachute, maybe a jetpack, and he could have made it to Clayton to throw everybody off.
The jetpack one, that's one that I haven't heard before. But when I provide my introduction to who D.B. Cooper was, I say on November 24th of 1971, a man using the name Dan Cooper boarded a flight going from Portland to Seattle, Washington. He handed a note to the flight attendant saying that he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he opened it and displayed what appeared to have been a bomb. Then, after taking the plane hostage, they landed in Seattle, and his demands were met. He got $200,000 and 4 parachutes, two fronts and two reserves, and then, or sorry, it's 4 parachutes. Let's just say that. And then after they agreed on a destination to fly to Reno, DB Cooper jumped out the back of the plane using the aft staircase, parachuted into the night, never to be seen or heard from again. And that's just kind of like the way that I provide the basic
Okay,
introduction.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to joke around. You're right. That is the accurate story of what happened. So what the question is, did he jump right away? Did he want to jump right away? Did he want to land in Seattle? Did he want to land in Portland? Did he want to land in Reno, Mexico City?
Well, if he was trying to land in Mexico City, I mean, yeesh, that guy does not know how to use a watch or something like that, or pay
He
attention to the
didn't have a
time.
watch, right? He didn't have a watch.
Well, in all serious though, Brandon, like, are you asking me this as a question? Because I have loads of questions for you, but if you're asking me this as a challenge question, the listeners of Black Box Online Radio know that I cannot refuse challenge questions. And I think that DB Cooper wouldn't have needed a watch because he would have been able to estimate where he was based on the time, because it was a 36-minute flight from Portland to Seattle without the interruptions of, the Cooper skyjacking. So that flight on November 24th of 1971 took over 2 hours because of Cooper's shenanigans. But I mean, knowing that it's a 36-minute flight, and he wouldn't perhaps be able to land on the exact patch of Earth that he wanted, but relatively speaking, by knowing a little bit about flight paths, which it seemed like Cooper did, it seems like this guy had really strong knowledge of aviation. I think that he would be relatively be aware of where he was jumping. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. That's a great point that he didn't need a watch because it was such a short time period. Like, you don't need a watch. Like, that's why I'm saying he wanted to jump early. He wasn't going to jump in Mexico City because
Of
he
course
couldn't
not.
account for that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I love what you're saying about that. He didn't need a watch because he already had it. Like, it's 36 minutes. It's he's got it under control.
Yes, I agree completely, though. But I found, though, that you seem to zone in on some very interesting aspects of the DB Cooper case, and that is what happened to this money, because this is in 1971 when we have the skyjacking, and it's not until 1980 that we find money at Tina Bar. And $5,800, or some people even say that it was the full $6,000, was found
It
in a
was the
safe.
full 6,000. Yeah.
Right, so that's found at Tina Bar in Washington State. Tina Bar meaning the sandbar, but it's actually kind of like a beachy area on.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been there. I've been in the water. I swam out to the money find spot. I've been there.
Well, what happened with that? Like, how on earth could money get to that specific location that doesn't seem to be in line with any specific drop zone? What happened with the money at Tina Bar?
Well, that's pretty easy actually. It what I think is it probably got caught up in a tree or something, and it eventually, like a microburst or a wind activity, blew it onto a container ship. Because if you've ever been to Tina Bar or the Columbia River, there are all these container ships that go. It's heavily trafficked. That's why you can't tell what way the river is flowing. Like, I thought the river was flowing south when I was there, but it's actually flowing north. But because of the container ship traffic, the wake goes a certain way. So it's very easy to think that it landed on a container ship somewhere and then fell off in the wind or by a bird, and then it floated to Tina Bar through the wake of the container ship, and that was just there for like a month or so before Brian Ingram dug it up.
Oh, well, I have a challenge question for you in regards to that. I'm throwing the challenge question your way now.
All
How
right.
could three bundles of bills end up roughly in the same place, kind of stacked on top of each other, or kind of it's not perfectly stacked on top of each other? And I know that you know this, but just trying to describe it for the audience, it's a little bit off to the side and going in other directions. But how would they be able to stay together if all of these events are happening?
Because they were with bank type bands, rubber bands, bank type bands, straps. It was just one little clump that got dislodged and stayed together. And you know what happens when, like, a clump of something is like in a tree for, like, my theory, for instance, in a tree for years, it hardens. And that's why it was so hard for Brian Ingram to get the bills separated, because they were so, like, over, like, let's say 8 9 years, they're compacted, and then once they fall, they're going to naturally stay connected to each other, and then boom boom boom, the river flows it, and they it gets gets up on the bay on the beach on the sand, and it's it's perfectly plausible that way. It's not ridiculous to think that that happened. There's no way that anyone buried that money. It makes no sense. Anyone that thinks that they buried the money is stupid. Um, it,
Well, now wait a second, wait a second. I have to throw in some interjections there because that is one of the most widely held beliefs about the money at Tina Bar. Like, for example, if you were to just get on a true crime channel that doesn't regularly talk about DB Cooper and they do a one-off DB Cooper episode, you'll most likely see some type of makeup girl kind of like putting on her mascara or something. And the only possible explanation is that the money was planted. I mean, people say that all the time, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I can tell you some my whole thought process, but this is our chance to talk to you, Brandon. Why is it implausible that the money was planted at Tina Bar?
because it makes no sense. You wouldn't go to bury something like that. Like I always say, like if you go to the Bahamas or some little island, you're not going to bury money on the beach of an ocean and expect it to be there years from later. Like it's going to be gone. So nobody would have went to the beach of the Columbia and buried something knowing that there's like erosion. Like it makes no sense. If you were going to bury something, you would bury it inland where it's safe and sound.
Okay, you want me to provide some challenges because there are lots of different people who have made observations about the Tina Bar money find. Why was the money planted? Number one, some people think that the flight path was different. They do not think that the conventional flight path was used, and that DB Cooper actually touched down at Tina Bar, and years later he came back to bury it himself as a way to commemorate the jump. Because once again, DB Cooper was never caught, so he did it himself. Number
That's
two,
assuming
Cooper.
that
Go
Cooper
ahead.
landed at Tina Bar, though.
It's an assumption. It's a big assumption.
Big assumption. Yeah.
I'm not like saying that's my personal theory. That's just one that's come
Eric
up throughout my
Lewis's theory.
explorations on
Rick
Cooper
Lewis.
Friday. But here's a second one. Tina Bar is the name of the Sandbar beach area, but there was a flight attendant named Tina Mucklow who was on DB Cooper's plane. Some people believe that DB Cooper returned there and buried the money just as some type of homage to Tina Mucklow, that he was paying some type of tribute to her, and he just always remembered Tina, so he buried it at Tina Bar. Again, years later, this is purely done in a ceremonial way, not for any practical purpose that he's going to reclaim, because Cooper was not dumb. This is one thing that I stand by and I take to the bank. I don't think that he was just a bumbling fool who got lucky. I think Cooper was smart. I mean, the way that he's talking about the airplane, just sipping his bourbon and such, like, and just giving these very specific instructions, the cool, calm, and collected Cooper that we've come to know. I think that Cooper would have known that the money would have been unearthed at some point. I think he did that as a way to pay homage. Well, no, no, not that. I think that
Oh,
if he had done that, it would have been he would have expected that it would have been found. But these are just two scenarios that are very widely discussed about why somebody would bury the money at Tina Bar. Why are they wrong?
yeah, they're very wrong because, uh, first of all, Tina Bar is not Tina Mucklow. And that's like Ryan Burns always liked to talk about Alice's restaurant analogy. You know about that analogy? Like,
I've
oh,
heard it before, but
if
I'll hear you introduce it.
oh yeah, if he's like, oh, if the money was found behind Alice's restaurant, and it was Alice Hancock that did it. Well, no, Alice's restaurant is a famous thing. Tina Bar is not a famous thing, and it's spelled different. So that
That's
makes no
true.
sense. Um, him like going back after years also makes no sense because he had already got away with it and he's wasting money. So I don't see any credence to this Tina Mucklow homage. It if anything, it, Tina, I don't want to put it. It doesn't make any sense. There's no connection between Tina Mucklow and Tina Bar, and to keep perpetuating that is ridiculous.
All right, then. Do you want another challenge, Brandon? Because
Yes, of course.
this is one that I bring up all the time because Ryan Burns actually just made a response to the documentary The Skyjacker That Got Away. I bring up that
Mhm.
documentary all the time on Cooper Friday because that was the very first Cooper Friday episode that I did. So it's kind of like always in the back of my mind. They
Mhm.
put forward the theory that number one, Cooper did not survive the jump. Number two, Cooper lands in the Lewis River or somewhere close to the junction of the Lewis River and the Columbia River. The parachute gets tangled up in the propeller of a boat, or as you brought up, one of the let's just say a boat for
Cancer.
simplicity's sake,
Okay.
and that goes up the Columbia River, and then the money is pulled out of Cooper's bag at some point, and he's just dragged for who knows how long and how far, and then ultimately either they cut the cord out or it came out on its own. They probably would have cut it out if it was tangled. And that's how the money got to Tina Barr. It was dragged by,
There would have been so much evidence of that, of a boat being damaged, propellers, body, money. No, it doesn't make any sense.
I agree completely, but that's one of the most famous documentaries that has been made.
No,
Even I
yeah.
was just thinking about that. All you would need is one boat captain to come forward and be like, "Oh yeah, there was paracord all tied up in my
Yeah,
propeller,"
right.
and then that would verify
Yeah,
that. For me. Like, all right, yeah, I agree, but that didn't happen. So I'm like,
right.
that's
So it
very
just makes
likely.
no sense. It's just
All right, though. So your theory, can I encapsulate this into a sentence? What you think most likely happened with the Tina Bar money find is that it fell from the sky, and these are the $6,000 that's tied together. That lands in a tree, and it's kind of lodged and jammed in that tree
hmm
for an extended period of time, multiple
Yep,
years, and then
yep.
something unlodged it, whether it was the wind or a bird or some type of natural
hmm
element, and then that lands. You said that the money would have fallen from the tree and landed on a boat. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
on a passing container ship. If
On
you
a
ever
container
been to the
ship.
Columbia, I bet when I was at Tina Bar swimming at the money find spot, I had to get out of the way because these container ships were coming down. It's a highly trafficked river, so it's very easy to think that this got displaced or on the docking wherever these boats. Maybe the money wasn't in a tree above Tina Bar; it was in a tree over by the dock, and it landed on there. And then by the time it went, it ended up at Tina Bar. There's a many scenarios where that works.
But here is another point. This comes up very frequently once you get into the vortex. That there were diatoms. There were like microscopic evidence that was analyzed on the money, and it determined that they were spring diatoms, meaning that the money had been in the water during the spring season. Is this all correct? I mean, am I phrasing that correctly?
No, the diatom. So this is what I'm saying, that this explains the diatoms, is because they're saying the diatoms are saying it could not have been there. So my theory of the container ship off the explains the spring diatoms
How does it explain that?
because it was only there for a certain amount of time. It wasn't buried. It didn't get diatomed and buried under the sand for 10 years before Brian Ingram found it.
Right. So you mean it came out of the tree perhaps like in the spring months and it wasn't discovered until much
Right.
later?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay. So, and do you accept the explanation that the diatoms came from the Lewis River, or do you think they came from the Columbia?
I don't accept any of Tom K's diatom research. As much as I love Tom K, I'm still hold a modicum of doubt that yeah, he might be wrong. We might need to do some more research. I love Tom, but don't worry about the diatom so much. There's a lot more to look into. Dredging, sand, look into the area back then, what was happening. There's a lot more to it. The diatoms are just one little piece. And the diatoms, Darren and Nicole were talking about it. Like if Brian and his dad went home and washed the bills in their tap water, could they have had diatoms from the tap water? And that's what the diatoms are. Like you can't put too much stock into one minute, minuscule little scientific thing.
Certainly. But if we're going to look at just some final concluding notes about Tina Barr, this would just I just kind of want to ask finally that some people though insist that the money would have been I mean, I guess I'm trying to say is that Jude Morrow, the author of the book Dan Cooper, says that if the money was in the water, then Cooper must have been in the water at some point. Do you think that Cooper touched down in the water, or do you think that Cooper touched down on land?
No. I was with Jude when I swam out to Tina Bar uh, at last year, November 2023. Jude was there when I swam out there, so he knows what I'm talking about. The fact of the matter is that money, I looked for money down there. I had a thing where I was gonna like bring a 20 because I was with Rick Eulis, and I was gonna pull out a 20 and be like, "Hey, look what I found," and give him a real clothesline, you know, real rock bottom, stone cold stunner to him. But no, Jude understands that. I'm sorry. What's the question again with Jude?
The question is, if the money was in the water, does that mean that Cooper was in the water?
No, not at all. That's what I'm telling you. The money fell off a tree onto a container ship and floated to Tina Bar. Cooper was never in the water. Jude doesn't think that. Nobody thinks that. And the money got spent. You know the money got spent, right? Was
Well,
like
I can ask you about that because that's going to be just a very good segue into my next question, which is that we've accounted for approximately $6,000, right, of Cooper's money, but Cooper requested $200,000 in $20 bills. Now, what happened to the rest of the money?
it got spent.
How? How is that possible?
You go to the store, you buy a sandwich, right? You go to a DeVita's Italian market, you get your meatballs, your mozzarella, your gabagool, you throw a 20 down. The old school days, the cash registers, these kids, they're 16 years old, they're not checking bills. They're putting it through and it's sending off. And if anyone did catch a serial number, there's no way to track it back. Like it's just spent money. That's what you do with cash. That's what happens with cash. That's what it's for. You spend it. There's no record of it. To think that anyone was looking at these serial numbers, it's ridiculous and stupid to think that anyone was actually like tracking this down. No bill could get past me. It doesn't make any sense. So I just think the money got spent like normal money, and that's an easy solve.
Okay, so this is for the audience. What we're talking about is the serial numbers of the bills that DB Cooper was in the possession of were recorded, and they have never been found in circulation. Now, somebody shared this stuff with me when I was starting the Cooper Friday segment that they really would have only been keeping a close eye out for about 2 years. And also, 1971 is well before the age of electronic equipment in the world of mostly anything. I mean,
Exactly.
we're not really dealing with computerized banking in 1971. So you would have to have somebody manually coming across a $20 bill, matching it to the list of $20 bill
Mhm.
serial numbers. Am I getting all this right?
Yep, that's right.
So that's what you think that he just spent the money normally in stores and just purchased things for himself?
Yeah, because no one was checking. Like, no one really knew about DB Cooper as much as people think we did. Oh, we're going to send the bank numbers to the banks or the serial numbers to the banks in the newspapers. But, like, no one's actually doing that. Like, it's not the fact that nothing came up doesn't mean anything. It'd be like right now if I signed a $20 bill in my wallet, sprayed my cologne on it, put my fingerprints all over it, gave you the serial number and sent it out. Let me know if you find it. You won't, because it's so vast. And back then, like Arthur Friedberg was on Darren's podcast, and he said, "Oh, that could never happen." But Arthur Friedberg also didn't know that they destroyed money without recording the serial numbers back then. So all that money, especially back then, because money is handled more than it is now. Now a $20 bill will last longer, but back then, cash is king. It's handled. We got to get rid of this cash, make new cash, and if you're not recording the serial numbers when you destroy it, it's gone. Like that's the fact of the matter. It's there's no way to prove that he did not spend the money, I guess.
Okay, and I want to remind everybody that I'm talking to Brandon Arnold all about DB Cooper, the money find at Tina Bar, and what DB Cooper did with his money. And every Friday I do a segment about DB Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio. And if you want to follow along with all of these episodes, you can hit the like button, subscribe, drop a comment down below. And if you want to share something about DB Cooper, for larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And for those of you who simply cannot get enough DB Cooper information and discussions, there is a bonus episode about DB Cooper that's going to be coming out every week here on BBO War, and it is called the Cooper Profile, that is mostly going to be focusing on the psychological aspects of the DB Cooper case as well as geographic profiling. And I also have episodes about the money find at Tina Bar and about what DB Cooper did with the money, where I give my own personal takes on the subject. And because I've done those episodes in the past, I had so many questions for you, Brandon, though, about like, what did you think about this person's theory involving the money? What did you think about that person's theory? But it sounds like all of your answers are going to be, well, he didn't have to do that because he could have just spent it normally. You want one of them just to kind of test the waters.
Yeah, give me a couple.
All right, so you said at the beginning of this episode that your suspect is Walter Recca, ha ha ha, and I just did a Cooper Friday episode called the Walter Recca tapes, and in that set of theories involving Walter Recca, multiple people have books out about him being DB Cooper. It is that he had a safety deposit box in Canada, so he lands. We're going with the cowboy to the coffee shop, sipping his decaf or whatever it was, and then he goes into Canada. He puts the money into a safety deposit box. He takes it out after a certain period of time, and then he spends it. He does spend it, but do you think that that's a plausible scenario that DB Cooper would have had a safety deposit box in Canada?
Are you sure you're not conflating like Dwayne Weber or Gossett with the safety deposit box in Canada story?
I think that's also mentioned in the Wolfgang Gossett theory. But yeah, it was well, like with Walter Recca, there are multiple books that have been written about him, and I'm pretty sure I just did the episode about 2 weeks ago, but I do think that also came up with the Wolfgang Gossett claims that he had a safety deposit box in Canada.
Okay, I didn't know about Rekka having a safety deposit box. Okay.
I don't think everyone has mentioned. I only heard one of the people talk about that because let's see, what are
Who
those
said
books that were written about him? The Search for DB Cooper and Me, and what is it? What's the Getting the Truth? That's the other book about Walter Recca. So
with Carl or Vern? You can't trust those. You can't trust those.
So do you just think that it would have been an impractical choice for DB Cooper to have gone into Canada and stored the money in a safety deposit box, or
Oh no,
is
not necessarily. I'm just saying it wasn't Rekka. Like I think Rekka was there. I think the Osada story at the cow, like at the Tina way. What was it called? Oh, God, they're gonna
you
be
mean like
yelling at us.
the restaurant,
You know what
right?
I'm talking about? The cafe. I think
Yes.
that's real, and I don't think Jeff Osada is a liar. I think Rekka was there. I just think he was there for some other shady stuff. Um,
I agree. No, I agree. Like, I believe that Walter Recca was walking in the woods. He maybe even was holding the raincoat. I believe he met a guy named Jeff Ositis who offered him a
yep,
ride in a dump
yep.
truck, right? And he drove him to a restaurant and he had a cup of coffee. I have no reason to doubt that story. And the reason why I don't doubt it is because it's about 100 miles east of where Cooper should have been. It's even more than that. I mean, like maybe 100 miles east of the drop zone. That's not even a fair way of putting it. He's in the completely wrong part
It's
of Washington.
northeast, right? And with the wind, it's so bad. That's why he would have had to have a steerable parachute or jetpack. It's the only way I can put Rekka or DB Cooper in Clay Elum.
I mean,
Uh,
I agree with all that. And what I said in my most recent episode called the Walter Recca tapes was if Walter Recca wasn't so obviously not DB Cooper, he might have something there where you have like video recorded confessions. They have these audio tapes of him
yes, we have
confessing,
that.
like where he's giving out a step by step set of well
Yeah,
steps that he took
he was
to.
gonna jump out the side door or something.
Well, then that's a big problem.
It's a big problem. Yeah.
Well, as I said, he's so obviously not DB Cooper. He's in the
Right.
wrong place. He doesn't match the physical descriptions.
Doesn't match the
He has
description.
problems with telling wild stories about being in the CIA and the KGB, which you just brought up.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this sounds like somebody who is what we call a liar. You've
But
met
he
them,
was
I've met
there.
them. All right, though. Now, the only other thing, though, that I would like to ask you about is I read an article off in my episode on the money. It was from, I believe, the Boulder City News that was talking about someone's theory, and that is that DB Cooper lands successfully. And the way he was able to keep the money out of circulation was he mailed it to a military installation that was out of the country, and then he just converted it into foreign currency, and it would have just been absorbed into kind of like just spread everywhere. No one would have been looking for it. And I think I know your response, but would you just like to make a comment on that one? Do you think that that's a plausible scenario?
Yeah, I kind of like that. Like, it makes sense. If he had like, oh, I'm gonna put it in here. You guys sign off on it. By the time the military or whatever you're talking about, it gets back. It's a yeah. I like that. I like that scenario.
I mean, we'll never really we might never know the exact details. That one I thought was very, very creative. Like he just
It's a
puts
good
it all
one.
in a
It's a good
package,
one.
mails it
Yeah.
somewhere, converts it to like whether it's Canadian dollars or pesos or I mean Danish kroner or
So
something.
many
And
ways to launder the money. Yeah.
all right though, now I am gonna give you a choice, Brandon.
All
Would you
right.
like to do a step-by-step analysis about what you think happened on the plane, or would you like to talk about the suspects?
Plain.
Okay, so I want to hear from you. What happens? We can start with Cooper. Cooper on the plane giving the note to Florence Schaffner. Take us from there. What happened?
Okay. He's got to be nervous. He's got to be waiting. She's gonna take this shit seriously, right? He's thinking like, "Oh man, come on, read it, read it. You got it. Go tell the appropriate people." But this is on the ground. This is what's so ballsy, and like, this is where I don't I go back and forth on DB Cooper planning this meticulously for months versus paper napkin planning. And I've actually been turning towards the paper napkin theory because there's so many things that he didn't do well. Spilling his drink, smoking cigarettes, uh, didn't bring his own parachute. Like it was desperation. So sometimes I think, oh my God, this was a napkin thing. And don't get me wrong, I do not think this was a Paulsini copycat, as Ryan Burns likes to contend.
How did you know that was
Oh,
my next question?
because Ryan Burns always talks about it, and him and I have been back. We almost came to blows at CooperCon because he thinks Cooper was a Paulsini copycat, and I said that's a bunch of bullshit and whatever. It's just back. You have to go back to the '60s and the '70s and what where you are. Like you're not getting news. He was just a criminal that did this, and he didn't think it through. He thought it through enough. I don't know if he had an accomplice or not. He, he I go back and forth with that so much, the accomplice thing. That's why if he had an accomplice, there's two ways to think of it. If he had an accomplice, did he want to jump right away in Seattle? Boom, catch me, drive me away. Or the accomplice was back in Portland. So he wanted to, but why would he want to lower the stairs immediately if he wasn't planning to jump till Portland? Maybe just to give himself. I don't know. Either way, but they don't have cell phones back then. Like, because if I'm doing this, I'm like, hey Ned, I'm in the plane. I'm about to jump. Right? Like I'm texting you. I'm gonna jump. I think we're over Vancouver, Orchards, Lake Merwin. Can you come pick me up in the woods over here? You can do that. But back then, there was no way. Like it all had to have been situated before. So it's I think he wanted to land between Seattle and Portland. He was not going to Mexico City. He was not going to Reno. That was that was a bluff. But yeah, if you land wherever, as long as you're safe, you can get to a payphone. You can get to a motel, a restaurant, and call your buddy. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there was an accomplice?
I think it's completely possible. And to all the people who say that the accomplice theory is impossible are overlooking everything that you just said. An accomplice does not have to be somebody who is just, waiting at the exact drop zone just to
Mhm.
like scoop Cooper out of the sky, pretty much. The
Exactly.
accomplice could have been somebody who was
They're not
just,
there catching him. They're not waiting with open arms to catch him when he jumps. They're
they don't
just
have
in the
to.
area with a walkie-talkie. Yeah. Sorry, go
Or
ahead.
even as you said, well, Cooper could have landed. Then he gets to the nearest payphone. He calls so and so, and he's like, "I'm in this town at a payphone by this restaurant." Even if he has to wait 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or something, and then the accomplice eventually gets there. I mean, something like that is not beyond belief for me. And I also particularly thought it was a creative explanation when someone said that the accomplice could have actually been on the plane with him just in case there was some type of altercation that kicked off. But I actually want to come back to the Paul Sini skyjacking because you said you almost came to blows with Ryan Burns about this. And for the
Mm.
listeners, in November of 1971, is it? I always mix this up, Brandon. Is it 9 days or 11 days before the
I
skyjacking
believe
gets?
it's 12 or 14 days. I don't
Okay,
know.
see, like, I don't know why I have such a problem with that. It's probably
It's a
because I
couple
don't know
weeks.
any math.
2 weeks.
But all right, 12 days before the Cooper skyjacking, there's a skyjacking in Canada that was committed by a guy named Paul Sini, and he did it in a very sloppy way. He almost got away with it, but it was extremely sloppy. He's wearing a black mask. He had 60 sticks of dynamite, which I'm pretty sure, I just can't even believe that I'm reading that correctly. And he had a shotgun that accidentally was discharged on the plane. And Paul Sini was ultimately apprehended because he was trying to undo the twine that held his own parachute together, but he had tied it too tightly. So he asked the crew for a sharp instrument, and they provided him with the fire axe that was used for emergencies. And while he was trying to cut the twine, he set down his shotgun, so he made himself vulnerable, and he was attacked by the crew. And ultimately, they hit him with both the wooden part of the axe and the axe head, and he ended up in the hospital for a considerable amount of time. Now, I'm going to throw one thing to you, Brandon, about how the Cooper skyjacking could be meticulous. It could be a napkin plan. It could be a Cine copycat all in one. Because if you have 9 days, 10 days, 12 days, someone could put an enormous amount of planning into the Cooper skyjacking in 12 days. They could be drawing out their little, napkin ideas, but they could also be putting a lot of thought into this over a period of 9 days and just thinking that, hey, this idiot Paul Sini, I could do better than him. Look at all these mistakes that he made. And I think that pretty much just to cut down on the sloppiness. So why exactly do you think that Paul Sini was not the inspiration or not the person who triggered a lot of things for Cooper? Why is Cooper not a Paul Sini copycat?
Well, that's the thing because it is very easy to be like, oh, because you know how like I go back and forth on the napkin theory. like, oh, he didn't really think it. So that would lend credence to the Cini copycat theory. Because if it was a napkin theory, then he didn't really think it too much. But what came from Cini and the ridiculousness and what Cooper was able to pull off, they're polar opposites. And like, how would he even know about Paul Cini? Because it was in the paper last week. Like, I
Yeah,
understand
certainly.
newspapers are popular back then, but like, it's way hard to get news. Like, if you're gonna, oh, it was in the newspaper. I was in the newspaper back in 1988. I Does anyone remember me? Like, no. Like, these things come and go. And there's no internet back then. There's no social media. It's not like a big story that Paul Paulsini did this and then DB Cooper was like, "Oh, I'm gonna learn this and then figure this out." And even if it was a napkin plan, he still wouldn't have done. I just think everybody was planning something like this. I think there was 30 to 50 people planning a hijacking for ransom at the time, and Cini just happened to be a drunk idiot that did it and got busted. And they were all the other people were like, "Oh, okay, so don't do that." It wasn't a copycat. It was all like DB Cooper had already had this in the works. Now, it wasn't maybe a great plan. I still think it could have been a napkin. Like, he could have spent more time, but maybe when Cini happened, he was like, "I got to bump this up a little bit." I don't know, but there's no way that Paul Cini did this and DB Cooper was sitting at home reading the paper 11 days earlier, and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this." No, it's stupid. Cooper was a Cooper was on another level. He was probably planning this way before, and maybe he didn't plan it well enough. But I don't know. Again, I go back and forth on the napkin theory to the well planned. Did he spend 2 months planning this, 6 months planning this? Did he even if he planned 2 days for this? I don't think it had anything to do with Paul Cini.
And if I understand you correctly, you mean that if Cooper was one of 50 people planning a skyjacking, you mean contemplating, right? You don't mean that
Yes.
50 people were about to jump into action immediately. You mean that they were contemplating this, then they
Yeah.
saw Alcini get busted, and they're like, oh, wow, this guy got caught. Maybe I shouldn't do it. But somebody like DB Cooper was, according to you, he would not have been familiar with the Paulsini story. But I really want to segue this into a different skyjacker case, and it's relevant to absolutely everything that we've been talking about in this episode. And there is a guy out there named Richard Floyd McCoy. Maybe you've heard of him.
Mm-mm.
And I think that he is someone who is just relevant to all of the points that we've been discussing. And firstly, what is your take on Richard McCoy as a DB Cooper suspect?
Oh, I'd never heard of him. Who is he?
He was some guy who was about, 28, 29 years old at the time of the Cooper skyjacking. He looked like he was 40, though. He had a very, very rough Mormon life, it appears, and it took out a lot of, took its toll on his body. He didn't
Was
have a
he in the
lot of money.
military? Was he a Green
Possibly.
Beret by chance?
Was he a Green Beret? Yes, he was. Yes, indeed. No,
He
Richard
was.
Floyd McCoy is, of course, the most widely discussed DB Cooper
Right.
suspect. He's been in the news countless times over the last 12 months. And I might even say that he is the most famous suspect among the general public, not in the vortex, but among the
Yeah,
general
that's
public.
yeah, you might be right about that. Yeah.
What is your take on McCoy?
I think McCoy was an easy scapegoat. Not a scapegoat. What's the term? Like, it was just easy for the FBI to be like, "Oh, look at him, copycat, boom, get rid
I know
of
what you
it."
mean. Not a scapegoat, not a fall guy. It's kind of just
Yeah,
like
but
the
just
when you
like,
throw the blame on. But
oh, and he just was in a tough spot. I think he got. He's not Coop like. he was a good guy. He was a badass Green Beret. He he was a good Mormon, you know. He wasn't drinking or
No,
like
he
he
ate
was eating
candy. It's just
candy on the
uh,
plane, not
yeah.
smoking and drinking. He was young, right? He was like 28 or something. Not that DB Cooper couldn't have been 28. Like, trust me, age and height requirements for DB Cooper, I'm very loosey goosey on that. So, but McCoy, I know he was kind of balding or whatever, and back then people looked whatever, but no, McCoy was a great guy and a real badass that got caught up in something, had PTSD, and made a big mistake after the Cooper thing. Tried to be a Cooper copycat, and then it was escape from prison. Like, ugh, just a mess for McCoy, and I feel bad for him and his family. But he's not Cooper. There's
To be
nothing,
honest, though,
nothing at all leading to Cooper.
Brandon, like you brought up about how McCoy was a decorated Vietnam veteran, Green Beret, and I think the two saddest things about the McCoy story is that number one, he was separated from his children, the toll that it must have taken on his family, and number two, he would have just had a military legacy. He would have been thought of, as just a highly respected individual, perhaps. I mean, I don't know everything about his military actions and what he did over there. But then just to turn all of that around and become the 1972 McCoy skyjacker, wearing his more or less clown outfit with, the bronze makeup that's dripping
Right.
and looking like
That's
a
what's so
goofball,
weird about
locking
McCoy.
himself
Like,
in the
why would he
bathroom.
do that? Yeah, I
Well, why
don't
did he do that?
understand. Why did he do it? Like, why
Because he
would
wasn't Cooper. He was a bumbling mess. Cooper
right?
had not much
But
better
why
luck.
did he hijack? It's just McCoy's a real like. I think it's PTSD. Like he didn't need to do the Utah skyjack. Like obviously he was not DB Cooper, but like why did he do his skyjack? Like there's
Oh, why? Well, I mean, I can tell you why. It's because
oh
McCoy was a criminology student, right? And he was right. He wrote a paper on criminological defenses against skyjacking, and he wanted to see how do you prevent them. And he found that really there was no solid way to prevent someone from skyjacking. So he's like, I could get away with this. Hey, I can ask for like $500,000, and he almost did, though.
just put
Really,
it
they're
to
just
the test. Yeah.
if it wasn't for all of those mistakes and all of the things that he did wrong, I mean, he may have been somebody like Cooper. And I know that that's an obvious answer, and maybe that's not the answer that you wanted, but like, yeah, that's why he did it. He
No,
did it for the money.
it's a
He saw
great
balls.
answer. I agree with it 100%. But the question is, why did the FBI think that he could have been Cooper? Like what?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's even come to the point where somebody told me they thought Larry Carr was lying because when I was listening to the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer and he was interviewing Larry Carr, and Larry Carr, the agent who worked on the case, was a guest on the show, and he's just like, "Oh yeah, when I took over the case, I thought it was McCoy." Years later, decades later, somebody, the FBI agent who is working on the case is thinking that it's going to be McCoy. And why does he think that? I'm like, it's just such a bizarre thing. I first looked at McCoy during my very first DB Cooper episode ever, and I was like, I'm just not seeing it. I don't think so, not at all. I mean, I guess we have different trains of thought, if you know what I mean.
Well, the issue with Larry Carr too is at CooperCon, not last year, CooperCon 2023. I wish we had video of it because someone asked him a question about something about like finding the body or the dead camp, and he contradicted himself. And I mentioned it to Chris Cunningham at the time, but no one has video of it. And it's like even Larry Carr, who we all love and respect, was I can't back it up, I guess, but I'm telling you, at he contradicted himself of whether he was dead or alive. And so like even the people that we trust and respect the most don't really know, can't explain to us what happened. Like it's so frustrating.
Okay, though, I want to talk about somebody else, though, who has McCoy as his suspect, and his name is Dan Greider. And
I
Dan
never
Greider
heard of
did
him.
a reenactment of the skyjacking. And this all ties into the money that was lost, because his whole claim is that he thinks that D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane holding on to the bag of money manually with his two hands, and he was unable to secure it. Or let's even give Dan Greider some charities. He needs the money. And that the money became separated from Cooper. He lost the money during the jump. So then he's thinking, oh my goodness, I lost $200,000. Now I need to ask for more than $200,000, and I'm going to do this again in 1972. And his suspect is McCoy. What is your take on everything that I just said there? And you're laughing.
Dan Greider is a liar and a grifter. He knows nothing about the case. He's latched on to something that he's interested because he's a pilot and a skydiver. So it's very convenient for him. Like when he did his little reenactment where he takes the money and throws it away. Oh, in a suit. Oh, he found nothing. The whole Richard McCoy thing where he infiltrated this poor lineage, uh, messed with the FBI. It's all nonsense. I mean, Ryan Burns, just go to Ryan Burns' DB Cooper sleuth page and find the debunking videos where he explains perfectly why Dan Greider did not find DB Cooper's parachute, that it was the wrong parachute. It was just a random uh, McCoy parachute. Like it's not even worth discussing how ridiculous Dan Greider and his research is. That's my take on him.
Okay, so what about this thing about how Cooper is jumping and he's holding the money in his hands? Like just he
No,
didn't
he's
secure
not.
the
That's not a thing. That did not happen. He
I gotta
tied it
press you
to
on
him.
that. Why didn't that happen? I mean, I can give my take on why that didn't happen, but I want to hear yours.
Oh, we could. He had the paracord. He was trying to wrap it up. And that goes back to my napkin thing. Like that's where I'm a little the napkin theory. You don't have a knapsack. You didn't bring your own book bag. You didn't bring your own parachutes. You're wrapping you're doing paracord to strap this money bag that's not in a knapsack. Like he was a little out of it. But to me, like if I was gonna do it, I'll tell you what I would do. I would bring my own parachute, my most favorite parachute that always works every time, and I can steer it and has a jetpack on it, and I can land it wherever I want. And I also bring my book bag to stuff the money in, and I have my mystery bag with my gun and my goggles and everything I need. But there's no indication that he had any of these things that would be so obvious to have. And that's what's concerning. That's why I think the napkin theory is real, but I still don't think he's an idiot. I think he just was so used to things going his way, which makes me think he's like a Ted Braden guy or Skip Hall or something like that. And it's tough to say. I don't know. I don't know.
All right, if that's the case, though, I would actually like to take a step back from the parachute and the money, and I would like to know. You can choose to ignore this question if you want, but can you give us a play-by-play about what happens when DB Cooper's jumping out of the plane and touching down on the ground? What's going on? What's going through his mind? What is he doing with the parachute? What is he doing to make his first steps after he's landing? Can you give us a play-by-play?
Yes, I love that question. Yeah. So when he lands, it was tough going. It was tough sledding there, by the way. But he made it down. Oh, maybe like twisted his ankle or something. No big deal. Or hurt his shoulder. But as soon as he lands, you got to bury that parachute. Scrape up some dirt, shallow grave style. Get rid of the parachute. Get in your mystery bag. Get your Argyle sweater. in your new pants or whatever he had in there, your fake beard, a hat, but he's still in the middle of nowhere. So now he's buried the parachute, but he's got all this money. Money, do the same thing. Bury the money. Get out of there. Call your accomplice. Make sure you make it to civilization. Call the accomplice. Accomplice takes you immediately back there with a car. You dig up the money. Nobody sees anything because it's the middle of the night at this point. They dig it up and they're gone. So the parachute is buried in a shallow grave. Everything else is with him and he's gone. Then he kills his accomplice because it's a loose end. He says, "Thanks, Joe." Bang. Buries him in the, you know,
Are you for real about this? Because sometimes you've been joking. So do you believe that one wholeheartedly?
no, I don't. I'm
That's the first time you actually had me going because I couldn't tell if you meant that or not because people do things like
It's
that in the
possible.
film.
It's possible, Ned. It's possible.
Right, right.
That's
I
what I'm
mean,
saying.
that is going to a different level of evil, though, because one thing that the Vortex has convinced me is that Cooper was indeed a terrorist. He's not just some guy who is like a thrill seeker who's like having a good time and a folk hero. I mean, he was a terrorist and he stole this stuff, and he
Mhm.
was someone who was definitely, definitely breaking the law for his own selfishness. He is not a good person, but
Unless he was the
murdering
worker
accomplice
bee.
like that, sheesh.
If he was the worker bee and it was the accomplice that was the main villain, and the accomplice killed Cooper.
That I have no problem with. That'd be funny. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking.
It's just something to consider. Who knows what happened out there?
Well, that's actually the most brilliant skyjacking plan that I have ever heard. Especially if it was somebody like his wife. Like, hey, you know what? Look at this guy Paulsini in the paper. I bet you could pull off a better skyjacking than that. Yeah, of course I could. I learned how to do that stuff when I was a pilot in Vietnam. So then he commits
Oh,
to skyjacking, calls from the payphone,
perfect.
come and get me. Soon as she gets the money, handgun, bang. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya.
Oh, that is perfect.
I am so glad I have a conscience. Otherwise, I'd probably be doing that tomorrow.
Oh my, right. Hey Ned, I'm gonna
Yeah.
send you a plan I have for a heist. Just show up and be my accomplice.
I am
You'd be
not
like,
trusting you now at
whoa,
all
oh
after we've
no,
had this discussion. Yikes.
you're right. Yeah,
All
that's
right,
what I
though.
mean.
So,
Keep it under
we've gone
question.
through a lot of different scenarios and we've talked a lot about Cooper in the different directions. But at this time, Brandon, would you like to discuss the DB Cooper suspects? Would you like to talk about one that you might think is more favorable than another? Is there anything that you would like to say about the famous DB Cooper suspects?
Oh, Cooper suspects? Like who? Like, are you asking me who my favorite suspect is, or you want
We
me to
can start with
random
that
one through
question. Do
five?
you have a favorite suspect? Do you have a favorite suspect?
I don't. No, I don't.
Why not?
Because I don't know who DB Cooper is. I'm assuming it's someone that we've never heard of. But as far as known suspects, I could give you a list if you want.
Well, firstly, may I just interject by saying that there are three major stories that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio: the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper. And I'm going to be adding the weekend show about JonBenet Ramsey coming very soon. And
Mm,
when I'm looking at these stories, like with the Zodiac Killer mystery, that's the one that I followed the longest. Almost 9 years I've been working on that, following that, producing content about that.
like, have
And
you
I
had
reached a
Kit
certain point.
Cunningham or Drew Beeson on your show?
I've had Drew on the show, yes. But
Oh,
what's happened is that I just realized that I am unable to verify any of these suspects. Yes, people make the case for them. Yes, people tell me the reasons
exactly.
why they think this person was, the Zodiac killer.
Yeah.
But I'm like, well, I don't know. That's not necessarily stronger than this other person's evidence. Or it
Right.
always goes into the category of, I suppose that that's possible. I can't rule this person out. But I don't necessarily know that that means that he was the Zodiac killer. And with
Exactly.
Jack the Ripper and DB Cooper, I'm not quite there yet. I mean, I still find some really fascinating observations that people make. But with the Zodiac case, after 9 years, I'm just like, okay, that could also just be a really bizarre coincidence. I can give you another list of 99 bizarre coincidences that make it look like this person should have been the Zodiac, but they can't all be the Zodiac. It just sometimes it makes sense to you. Sometimes it's in line with what you want it to be. And this just seems like it's absolutely the guy. This guy has to be that person. But the physical evidence isn't there. And people ask me all this all the time, who's your top Zodiac killer suspect? I'm like, I don't have one. I don't have one because I
No, I
don't
don't.
have the evidence to support it. So in terms of your thinking about DB Cooper, did you experience a similar thought process, or was your thought process different?
No, I like always say coincidence is coincidence is an explanation used by fools and liars, unless it's real. And how do you know it's real? So with DB Cooper, I have nothing. I have no strong opinion on who DB Cooper is. I have no strong opinion on who Jack the Ripper is or the Zodiac. Like, and once you throw in coincidences, it's a mutated exponential mess that you get into. So I'm sorry, what's your question? Who do I think Cooper is?
My question was, who is your top suspect?
Oh, my top suspect? Rekka.
Of course, yes. I
I'm
think once I buy all the books, he'll be my top suspect too, and I read them all, and
no, it's Braden. I can't like it's Braden or Skip Hall. Like I need somebody else to sway me because I don't care about height on the airplane. I know that's the big problem on Braden,
I
and
don't either. I think that's a ridiculous strike against Braden to say that he was too short when he's sitting down for the majority of the time. And
you're on an
it's not like no
airplane.
one
It's like a
is using
fun
the
house.
measuring tape, and they're like, 5'8", 5'9" versus 5'11" and a half. I mean,
Oh, and you're on an airplane, which is like a fun house for trying to gauge people's height, right? Everything's like
100%.
distorted and everyone's and there's cigarette smoke everywhere back then, remember? Like you can't even see them. Everyone's nauseous. The non-smokers are nauseous. Like, yeah, I think Braden is still even I don't really like Braden that much, but I guess he's my number one, unless
Well, let me rephrase the question then, because this is from Drew Beeson, who wrote the book Paratrooper of Fortune, who has Braden as his suspect. And on his program, which you can find on Drew Beeson's Unsolved Mysteries and Missing Persons channel here on YouTube, and he said, out of all the widely discussed DB Cooper suspects, which one would you want to recreate the skyjacking? Like, if you had to choose one of them to commit a skyjacking and to do all the same stuff, get the $200,000 and the four parachutes,
it's
which
obviously Braden, right?
obviously Braden. I agree with that
Yeah.
100% because I just think that he is the exact type of person that would be required to do that. But I'm going to talk about this a lot on the next actually Jack the Ripper show just because it makes sense to you, right? And all of these points are in line, and all of these supporting reasons match up about why you think this person was the culprit. That does not mean that they were the culprit. And I'm going to be
Oh, you talking
challenging a
about
lot
the
of the
DNA on the shawl from Jack the
absolutely
Ripper?
not. Absolutely not. I'm talking about the commonly held beliefs among the members of law enforcement, the investigators and inspectors that, made comments about suspects and, their expert opinions and so on. They can give those expert opinions all they want. Sometimes we see true crime mysteries solved, and it's not who we think it is. And it's not who has been
What?
widely discussed on the internet. And
What?
it's not who it should be. It's just, wow, that's kind of shocking. It turns out it's just some type of janitor working by himself and living a solitary life.
Yep.
Like,
I agree. Yeah.
and I'm just going to go through countless examples on that. But no, they don't have Jack the Ripper's DNA as of yet, or they haven't identified it on the
Well,
shawl. That's
I'm
what you're
just saying,
asking.
what do you think about Jack the Ripper? Who's the guy? The guy had the shawl, the
Russell
DNA.
Edwards.
Yeah, you don't think he's Jack the Ripper? He's just a John, right? That.
Oh, you
banged.
mean Aaron Kosminski, the suspect? Yes.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well, it's mitochondrial DNA that could exist within hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even 200,000 people could have shared the same mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is not nuclear DNA. It's not the one that verifies somebody, to like the 99.9% chance that it's the
But she
same
was a
person.
hooker, so isn't it more obvious like that Kaminsky was just a John that she had banged and his semen got on the shawl
It
after
might not be
before
his
she got
semen.
murdered?
It might not be his semen. It might be one of two. Let's like even divide 20,000 in half. It could 10,000 men in white in England and London could have had the same mitochondrial DNA in that area. So that doesn't mean that it's Kosminski.
No, it's Kaminsky. Like the point is, did he murder her or did he just happen to have his semen on her shawl? Like that's my point is he wasn't the murderer. He was just a John that she banged and his semen was on her clothing.
Entirely possible. Entirely possible. Here's another point. Jack the Ripper didn't rape his victims, so there's one major
Right.
issue. I mean, was
There
semen
you
left
go.
behind at the
Exactly.
other crime scenes? No. I mean, well, let's be clear. Let's be clear. Is there like a matching semen sample that has united all of the five most famous murders? I don't believe so, and I think if there were, that would be something widely discussed.
Right.
Therefore, we simply
Yeah.
do not know if that's Jack the Ripper's DNA, but it's possible.
Right.
I mean, this is
Well,
one of the reasons why people
yeah,
don't
it's
like me
possible.
because I don't always just say yes or no. It's possible that Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. Do they have the evidence to support it? No, they don't.
Yeah, it's possible. It's also possible that anybody else was Jack the Ripper. There's
Again,
probably
like I've
more
heard,
DNA on that thing other than Kosminski. Like
well, I've heard
this
other
is not
great
an open and shut
explanations.
case like that guy is saying. Is all I'm saying.
No, they do not have 100% certifiable DNA evidence in the Jack the Ripper case, and it's not like I'm trying to keep the case open or something like that. I have no control over what Scotland Yard says. I mean, if Scotland Yard makes the
No, we gotta
determination
keep
that
it
this
open.
person was Jack the Ripper, then that person was Jack the Ripper in their minds, and I would accept it. But the
It's your
same with
home.
DB Cooper. Same with Cooper. If the FBI signed off on it, I can't dispute that. Yeah, the FBI signed off on that.
Oh, you can dispute it. You're allowed
I
to.
can't dispute that the FBI has chosen like a suspect. I mean, I can say that their findings are incorrect, but if they made a public announcement, then I would be like, yes, they did make
I
a public
dispute it.
announcement.
I would dispute it. If the
Oh, you
FBI
would?
said it was Richard McCoy, I would dispute it. And so can you.
I mean, I would accept that they have like closed the case in their minds, but I mean, if they proposed a suspect that I thought was extremely ridiculous or something like John Emil List, for example, I would say no, no. That's most likely incorrect. Most likely somebody made a mistake along the way.
Most likely. So you're
Yes,
still
John.
leaving it open. You have to
Well, I
say
mean,
no.
you'd really have
It
to
was
wonder,
not
like,
Frank Miller. It was
we opened
not.
up a can of worms. Okay, but Brandon, what's going on? Why is John Emil List DB Cooper? Why did the FBI sign off on him as DB Cooper? Did they have a reason? Um,
Just because the timing of his disappearance. That's all.
I would tell him to get lost. I would tell him that's the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. John Emil List was working as a fry cook in some restaurant in Colorado at the time while his family was freezing beyond repair in whatever state they were in.
Right.
And
So they
I
figured it out.
No, but that's mostly what happened with Johnny Emil List. Like he wasn't in Washington State. He was just hiding out in a motel in Colorado, right?
Yeah, until he got caught. No, it wasn't Colorado. It was like Maryland or Virginia,
That's
right?
when he was captured, but like
Oh, okay.
he drove his car to the airport and he took a train out west and I believe he went to Colorado during the initial months. Then of course, he restarted his life and all that. Terrible,
How long
terrible.
did he
So,
go before, like, between when he killed his family when he got caught?
oh, see, that was 70. Was that 71 to
Yeah. To
then
what?
at least 81? Is it couldn't be 28 years. No, is it 18 years is what stands out in my mind, but it seems like
18
it should be more than
years? And he was living with a new family and everything? That's crazy.
I mean, 18 years is what stands out in my mind. I have to go back and look at that stuff again, but I don't think John Emile List was DB Cooper. I think he was a
No,
family
no,
annihilator who did some horrible things, and
no,
rest
it's
in
not.
peace to the victims.
Yeah, it's not. You're right. It's not him, but that's what I mean. Like, what other true crime mysteries are you into?
Well, I'm really hoping to do more with the Black Dahlia in the future. It's
Oh, I
just
like that one.
I'm a little bit going to be a little bit focused on the four that I follow most closely: Cooper, the Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, and JonBenet Ramsey. And to all of you who are listening to this episode as it comes out live, the JonBenet Ramsey episodes will come out tomorrow. They will be airing tomorrow here on Black Box Online Radio. That will be the start of the new JonBenet Ramsey series. And if you are curious about that case, I invite you to tune in and check it out. And you can also give your feedback about what you think happened. And again, the Ramsey case is another one where people have lots of suspects. People
Yeah, it
claim
was Gary
did.
Oliva, right? Probably.
Great. Yeah, Gary Oliva comes up all the time. Some people think that they're different intruders. They think it's a family member, and we're going to go through all of that. But
Oh, look forward to that. That's good. I like that you're looking into that because it's got to be the most famous unsolved mystery, other than Black Dahlia, which I like Black
yes,
Dahlia, but it's so old and most people aren't gonna care. Like,
all right. And Brandon, though, at this time, I would like to turn it over to you and ask: do you have any final send off for the listeners of Black Box Online Radio? Is there anything that you're working on with your DB Cooper research journey? Is there anything you'd like to explore? Please just give your final concluding thoughts on DB Cooper for BBO War.
oh yes, I would like to say that the DB Cooper money got spent, and there's no evidence that it did not get spent. And anyone that says that it did not get spent is stupid. The money uh, was out there. No one was checking serial numbers. Um, he survived the jump because he had a parachute, and that's what parachutes do. That's the point of parachutes. You land safely. Even if he hit a tree, he might have got hurt. Um, but he could have just buried like DB Cooper. He could have been Joseph Newton Chandler living in Eastlake, Ohio. I want someone to challenge me on a DB Cooper myth that okay.
That
My
DB Cooper
final
was
word.
Joseph Newton Chandler?
Yeah, that's my new favorite suspect, Joseph Newton
Robert
Chandler.
Ivan Nichols, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Robert Nichols. You know what I'm talking about. So
Absolutely. Robert Ivan Nichols was the first person identified via the DNA Doe project, and he comes up in the Zodiac circles all the time,
yep,
as
he
well
sure is. Yep.
like
And
other. Go ahead.
I am going actually to his apartment where he killed himself next week up in East Cleveland area because I live I'm from Northeast Ohio. I know you're West Virginia, so we're sort
That's
of
right.
neighbors. But yeah, I'm gonna go I'm gonna go snoop around. You know, I think there's something might be something to that. He's not very tall, but you know,
5'7", right?
if you say so.
Just going off of memory though, but all
Okay.
right, though, Brandon, thank you so much for being a guest on Black Box Online Radio and talking about DB Cooper as well as all of these other cases: the Zodiac, Jack the Ripper, Jean-Benet Ramsey, and even some other things like the disappearance of Robert Ivan Nichols and stealing the identity of Joseph Chandler. Thank you for being a guest, and to all you listeners of Black Box Online Radio, we'll see you next time.